Well, it's cold and shitty outside, so perfect day to work in the garage. Let's get to it. Sure is nice to have a heated garage to work in. Not have to freeze my ass off. Last year at this time, I was freezing my ass off. I upgraded my cribbing here so that it'll sit on these casters and I can roll them around. Nice and easy. And I changed the configuration under here. So instead of it being set up on four corners on the cribbing being on the floor, it kept sliding around. It was no fun at all. But now I can wheel the thing in and out. I can wheel it up here. I can put it in place. I can wheel it out. I can bang on it a little bit. It's working pretty well. All right, in the last episode, I was manipulating this floor pan here to fit the 4-link cradle into. As I was hammering on it, the metal got thin, and I ended up just cutting it. I'll show you that. I didn't like how thin this was getting, so I just went ahead and zipped it across there, and then it was easier to push down. I'm going to end up remaking this piece in here eventually. After I get this all fit together, I've got some fitment issues, and we'll go over those right now. Okay, I've got the cradle set in there. I've got my string line run, and I've got the cradle centered there. I'm using the spring pockets. I've got those bolted in here to locate the frame rail so that it's sitting in the right spot on both sides. As I go down this frame rail here, it's fitting really good right in here. This frame rail you can move side to side pretty easily, so that one's all right. But the fitment issue is over here on this side. You see the gap between the frame rail and the cradle. Now this frame rail, this is the driver's side, has got a lip down here. And I'll pull this apart and show you what I'm talking about, but it's keeping it from moving over that far, as well as it's getting pretty cozy with the trunk floor in here, so it may need some adjustment. I'll show you the detail on that little tab down there. Okay, here's that frame rail, and if the problem is right along in here, if I pick it up and turn it over a little bit, you can see this area here that hangs down and goes across here is hitting this area right in here, and I don't like it. I want it to go over that way a little bit. I mean, just, you know, half an inch or so. So I've got to come up with a plan here. I got that frame rail over here on the bench. I took a die grinder and trimmed down this edge right here. Sorry, the lighting's real bad, but trim down that edge, and then I'm bending that flange out just a little bit right there. Bend that out just a little bit. I just need a 1/4 of an inch, so hopefully I can get that just by bending it a little bit. Let's see if it works. Well, bending it didn't do a whole hell of a lot, so I'm just going to cut her off there. Wish me luck. All right, I've cut off this little piece from there, and that allowed it to move over 1/8 of an inch. But I think I've got a little bigger problem here because even still yet, it's not moving over quite enough. You see the gap right in there? And I'll explain. Okay, I've got my center line pulled here. I've got the cradle sitting in there pretty much dead on. I mean, pretty darn close at least. This frame rail over here is looking great. Like it's got the spring hanger or spring perch at the front bolted in. It's nice and straight. It looks good on this side. And then you come over to this side, and yeah, the frame rail looks great, but it's not attached to the cradle. And with the spring pocket bolted in here, it doesn't match up with the cradle. But if I unbolt it from the spring hanger, spring perch, and clamp it to the cradle and have the cradle centered pretty well, you'll notice that this frame rail is kicked over about 1/2 an inch. Like this bolt hole here should line up with this bolt hole here, but it doesn't. It's over a bit. And I think that's because this frame rail is supposed to kind of go in and then kick back out. If I compare it to the one on the car there, it seems like the one on the car you know, it dives in and then kicks out again to match up to that spring perch. So I think that I may have to manipulate this frame rail a little bit. Okay, after playing with this thing for a little while, I kind of went back to the drawing board. Yeah, I know this frame rail is probably kinked a little bit. This one here has got a little wobble to it as well. So what I did is I got the cradle set where I liked it, put the frame rails in, and then just made sure that the cradle didn't move and clamped the frame rails to the cradle on both sides so that it fits up real nice and tight, because that's what's important here, is getting it tight to the cradle, getting this area, because that's going to hold all my suspension, getting that guy tied in to the frame rails, and then getting the frame rails tied into the car. So I clamped that up nice and tight. I came back here because this area here is easy to manipulate, and I got that setting where it's supposed to be. And then I came up to the front and I left the front unbolted and unclamped so that I could see exactly how off these frame rails are. And well, it's not too terrible bad. Like, I mean, yeah, it's probably half an inch, but I think I should be able to bend this frame rail in here somewhere. That's the plan anyway. Take a look at the other side as well. It's not as perfect as I had previously let on. Like, it's out a little bit. I marked around here to show where this should be sitting, and as well if you compare the bolt hole. But this one over here you can move. I can move. You can't move it, but I can move it by hand just a little bit, and it's just a little bit tweaked. But I'm hoping that I should be able to move these frame rails out a little bit, just right about here, both sides, and see if I can't make that happen. I think first off, I'll go ahead and bolt in this cradle, bolt it to the floor, bolt the floor pans together, and then as well maybe drill some holes and bolt the back half of these frame rails in here a little bit so that they're where they're supposed to be. And then I'll make up something to spread those frame rails up front a little bit, see what happens. All right, so I've bolted the cradle in, just one bolt in the front and the back parts here, as well as I threw some bolts in to where the floor pans meet up to get those tied together. Also along the frame rails here, I put a couple little, they're 1/4 inch Allen head cap screws with some flat washers. Pull the panels together and make sure that everything fits up nice and tight. Not enough room for a washer on that one. But I did the back of both of these frame rails, and I should be able to unbolt this, pull it apart, play with it a little bit, and then bolt it right back where it went. I also marked on the frame rails here where they are bent. Okay, so they come up and then they kind of come out a little bit, but I don't think they come out quite enough on either side. So I marked the middle, and then I marked the edges where I don't want it to move. So I've got to rig up some kind of clamp to hold the frame rails together here, and then heat them up and pry them out. I got a porta power over there, and we're going to give that a try. See what we can do. Okay, to keep from deforming this frame rail here, got the frame rail off, sitting over here. I've wedged 2x4s and some shims in here to keep this spread open so that whenever I start bending on it, it doesn't collapse. I'm going to bolt it back in and see how it looks. There we go. Just a little bit of heat right in that area, and the porta power set up there, and it's just clamped in to the cradle here, bolted in down on this end, and you can see up here the porta power's off of it now, but she is pretty much right inside the lines there where it needs to be. Let's see if this spring pocket fits in there. Oh, look at that. All the holes line up real nice. I think I like it. I think I like it a lot. All right, let's go do the other side. All right, so I put some heat on it, put some pressure on it with the porta power, and then clamped it together. Now I'll let it cool down a bit. Those blocks of wood that I put in the frame rail to keep it from squeezing together, I got those wet to keep them from, you know, bursting into flames. As well, I've got a little water bottle here, so if it starts smoking too bad, I can douse it a little bit, but it's going pretty well. I've got it pushed over just a bit too far, you know, because it's going to spring back a little bit. I'll let it cool down a little bit, and then I'll pull the clamps off, and we'll see where we're at. Okay, I've unclamped this end of it, took the porta power off, and you can see it's pretty close within the lines here, and the bolt holes line up pretty dang perfect. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I think I'll move forward and maybe bolt the frame rails to the main floor pan. We'll see how it goes. Okay, as I'm manipulating these frame rails, I want to make sure that they're parallel and that they're square. And the way that I do that is I use this reference hole here, and I cross measure from here to that shock mount on the cradle on both sides, cross there and across here. Make sure that those measurements are the same. They're within, you know, probably less than 1/8 of an inch is what they are, as well as I measure from here to the back of that frame rail over there. Same thing on the other side, from there to the back of that frame rail over there, and again within 1/8 of an inch. Now, to make sure that this main floor pan is square, I measure from the subframe mount bolt there across to here, and then as well from this one here over to that reference hole on that frame rail over there. And again, within 1/8 of an inch. I think I can live with it. I think I'm pretty happy with it. I think I should be able to bolt this together and move forward. Speaking of bolting this together, the idea for these 1/4 inch Allen head cap screws came from another YouTuber. His name is Mr. Fireman 164. If you haven't checked out his channel, do it. He's got tons of good stuff on there. Always doing something awesome. Thanks, Roger. Before I bolt these in, I want to make sure that they're sitting exactly where I want them. The passenger side is really nice. It's nice and tight to the floor in there, all the way down, all the way around. It's nice and tight. The driver's side, however, this frame rail here has got a pretty good gap. If you can see that, yeah, you see the light in between the frame rail and the floor pan there. It comes down all the way. It's tight right in here, and then it gaps out again down in here. See if I can't show that gap. Yeah, see the light in there? That's how much gap I've got. So I've got to try and squeeze the frame rail and the trunk floor together right here, because I think this area here needs to be pushed out a little bit on that trunk floor. Well, let me unbolt it and see what I got. All right, I took it apart. I unbolted this frame rail, took it off there, did some massaging of the trunk floor right in there, and now she's fitting real good, real tight. I went ahead and drilled it and bolted it together kind of along through there. And you can see here, that gap down below here is pretty minimal now. Can't even see anything in there now. Anyway, it's looking good. I'm pretty happy with it so far. I think the cradle may need a little bit of adjusting, but before that, I want to shorten the frame rails because they're too long. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I've got the inner tail panel just kind of held up there with it's setting on the clamps and got magnets holding it up there. But on this side here, you can see it's tight against the frame rail, right against there. But the tank mount, this is where the gas tank mounts to, should be tight, but there's about an inch of gap there. Okay, so that's how much I've got to take off of each of the frame rails to get that to set up there tight. As well as there's a lip that runs the length of the tail panel, and it should be sitting on top of this trunk floor. So I mean, it is what it is. So you just gotta chop it up a little bit. Here's the frame rail on the car. You can see this support along the frame rail. It ends right there, and then you've got the flanges where it ties to the tail panel, and it's like that on both sides. There's not very much space between that support and the flange. Wait a minute. I'm sure there are several ways that I could go about doing this, But what I think is going to work best for me and be the simplest is to just go ahead and whack this off about an inch back, and then take a piece of 1/8 inch flat steel, a little bigger than this, like this is just for demonstration purposes, but actually weld that to the end of the frame rail, and then I'll have a nice flat surface that I can drill holes in this and spot weld the valence to that piece of 1/8 inch steel, which is welded to the frame rail, and that should be nice and solid and strong and should work well. As well as it'll offer me a lot of adjustability. Like if I leave these a little bit long and fit the tail panel up to it and sneak up on it and get that 1/8 inch gap there, you know, just an 1/8 of an inch, I think that's going to work out good for me. I'm going to go ahead with that. All right, I cut both those frame rails back by an inch. Let's see how a tail panel fits. All right, that is way better. See how it's sitting on that trunk floor, nice in there, real nice. I come to this side here, and you can see tank mount is right tight up against there. These frame rails will probably need a little bit more adjustment before I actually weld this stuff together. As far as like this one needs to be shortened, that one over there needs to be straightened up a little bit, just for that 1/8 inch for that flat steel to fit on there, to have nice flanges to plug weld this guy to it. I think that's it. I think that's good for now. I'm gonna sit and scratch my head for a little bit.